Hello and welcome to The Stream. I'm Imran Garda, once again filling in for Derek Ashong. And you are in The Stream, a social media community with its very own TV show. And this is it. We're bringing you the stories that are ongoing, global and sourced from social media. Today, as the Palestinian Authority prepares to unilaterally declare statehood, Israel fights back using social media. Malika Bilal is here, filling in for Ahmed Shihabuddin, our digital producer. She's bringing us your feedback all week, and it's your last day this week, and of course, last day for some time. Welcome, Malika.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And also joining us on the couch is PJ Crowley, former spokesperson at the US State Department. He resigned earlier in the year after publicly criticizing the Pentagon over its alleged mistreatment of whistleblower Bradley Manning. PJ, thank you very much for joining us.
Nice to see you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Nice to see you on the orange couch. I'm used to interviewing you with both of us wearing a tie and the tone's a bit more serious. So it's nice to have another platform. Tell us what you've been up to ever since you left the State Department.
Well, since leaving the State Department earlier this year, I'm preparing to teach. I've been offered an appointment for the next year in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, about 2 hours from here in Washington, D.C. I'll be teaching classes at Dickinson College, the Penn State School of Law and School of International Affairs, and at the Army War College.
And you're a prodigious tweeter. Let me look. I'm looking at your page. Call it up here. 34,910 followers. I'm imagining there'll be a few more after this program. Philip J. Crowley, PJ Crowley, Washington, D.C. Why the love affair with Twitter? Was it something that was a part of the job initially that you just continued with, or is it something else?
Well, at the State Department, I was smart enough to listen to my young staff. They said, you've got to do this. It is part of what the United States government is trying to do. We see the power of social media in the so-called Arab Spring, Arab Summer right now. If there's a debate going on using these tools, the United States has to be a part of that debate.
Your last tweet saying, looking forward to my appearance today on AJ Stream, talking about the ongoing challenge that is the Middle East peace process, and we're going to get into that. When you say the challenge that is the Middle East peace process, it opens up a can of worms, doesn't it?
But it's one of those ironies that having in a previous tour in government back with the Clinton administration in the late 90s, having been at Y Talks in 1998 and Camp David in 2000, the tragedy here is that the ultimate solution is fairly well known. It's getting the politics to a point where both Israel, Palestine, supported by the rest of the region, can make the necessary compromises and agreements so that you have security and the Palestinian state that the people of Palestine certainly are entitled to.
Well, a recent video may add a few layers of complexity to the issue, as we're going to show you. But first, let's go to Malika. Malika, what have you got for us in terms of feedback?
Thanks, Imran. Well, today our Twitter feed is buzzing with your comments on the stories we've covered this week. Yesterday, social media activists in Malawi kept us up to speed on the state of fast-moving protests in and around the capital over rising petrol prices and what they call government mismanagement of the economy. And that's the story you see here on my screen. Well, residents of Malawi tell us events escalated overnight. Raufu Kiwala tweets, riots have started in Kawala Township, police firing tear gas to protesters, vehicles running away at the speed of light. Well, we're definitely keeping our eyes on that story. But also of interest is the feedback we've received from our lunchtime in the Mosquiteria story. I'll pull that up here. Now, this is a story in which a blogger's tale of Islamic prayer taking place inside a Toronto middle school ignited an online debate in Canada. Brian Thompson tweeted, allowing religious services to be performed in schools is dangerous because it indicates that any religion can be practiced. But Paul Egunewe responded, our religions are part of our human rights. If we accept this, then we will be happy supporting Muslim children in Park School. And A. Jesse Strauss had praise for our guest, Fatima Kader. Props to LTW Designs, which is her Twitter handle. Great guest on AJ Stream discussing religious hegemony and religious freedom in Canada. Well, we love hearing your feedback, so continue to let us know what you think, and remember to tweet in the stories you're following at #AJStream.
Hi, my name is Amir Ahmed Nasr. I'm a Sudanese blogger, and I'm the curator of the Future of Islam in the Age of New Media, and I am in the stream.
The Palestinian Authority is expected to make a unilateral push for statehood at the United Nations this September. Israel opposes the move, saying it could cause a breakdown in peace negotiations. But both sides are engaged in a furious diplomatic campaign to get support from member nations for the crucial UN vote. Much of that issue has spilled over into social media, with even Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister Danny Ayalon getting into the act. He recently released a 6-minute video on YouTube called "The Truth About the West Bank." Let's have a look at a few excerpts, starting with this one.
We'll start with a simple but extremely important question. From whom did Israel capture the West Bank? From the Palestinians? No. In 1967, there was no Arab nation or state by the name of Palestine. Actually, was there ever?
Divisive, controversial. And if you look at where I paused it, you see a caricature of an Arab with a gun. This is going to be the starting point for our discussion. Joining us via Skype is Gil Hoffman, Chief Political Correspondent for the Jerusalem Post. Also with us is Hossein Ibish, Senior Research Fellow at the American Task Force on Palestine. The ATFP says it is dedicated to ending the Middle East conflict through a negotiated agreement. Welcome to the stream, both of you. Let's start with Gil Hoffman. Gil, I'm sure you've seen the video. Do you agree with the video, endorse the video?
I understand the point of view of the Israeli government wanting to get across historical information about what happened in the past that the world seems to be confused about. The world seems to have an impression that Israel is trying to take land away from a Palestinian state, when in fact it was occupied, the West Bank was occupied by Jordan before, and that occupation was never recognized by the world, and it's always been not occupied territory but disputed territory by international law, in which the final borders are going to be decided at the negotiating table.
Gil, something that's interesting to me is that there's a great demand on the Palestinians to recognize Israel's right to exist. Now, I'm not being creative in my interpretation of Danny Ayalon there, but it seemed quite clear that there was almost a failure to recognize the Palestinians' right to exist in an almost existential sense. When you say, well, was there ever a Palestinian people? Did they ever even have a land for themselves?
Danny Ayalon is the Deputy Foreign Minister in a government whose Prime Minister has said that he is in favor of the creation of a Palestinian state, and has been working to try to bring it about by trying to get the international community, to get the Palestinians to come to the negotiating table. And that is going to be true regardless of the historical facts that are brought out by that interview. You can argue that it might make it harder because he is disparaging them, but you can understand the frustration that there is in an Israeli government that's been waiting at the table for 2 years and not had anyone come to talk to them.
Hossein Ibish, does the video and perhaps even further than that, beyond the video, does Gil Hoffman's endorsement and support for the video disturb you?
Well, Gil Hoffman's absolutely entitled to his opinion. But for Deputy FM Ayalon to say that Israel isn't the occupying power because there never was a Palestinian state, and to claim vindication of Israel's policies based on the fact that there hasn't ever been a Palestinian state is very much like the man who killed both of his parents and threw himself on the mercy of the court on the basis that he's an orphan. In other words, the reason there hasn't been a Palestinian state is the conflict with Israel and Israeli policies, and that's just very clear. Now, the Palestinians, just on a point of historical fact that you were mentioning, the Palestinians, through their sole legitimate international representative, the PLO, has recognized the state of Israel in 1993. And there's never been a reciprocal recognition of either a Palestinian state or the right of Palestinians to have a state. Now, PM Netanyahu has said that he endorses in some very vague way the goal of a two-state solution, but all the policies that his government are pursuing look much more like creeping annexation than anything else. One final point, the whole point of Ayalon's video is to deny that the occupied territories are occupied territories.
Yeah, I'm gonna show you that video. Let me show you that video before I bring, show you that clip before I bring PJ Crowley into this because this is pretty pertinent and revealing. Let's watch this.
Chain of events. Israel's presence in the West Bank is the result of a war of self-defense. The West Bank should not be considered occupied because there was no previous legal sovereign in the area, and therefore the real definition should be disputed territory. The 1947 partition plan has no current legal standing, while Israel's claim to the land was clearly recognized by the international community during the 20th century. That is why the presence and construction of Israeli settlements...
Okay, and then he goes on to say that is why the presence and construction of Israeli settlements is not illegal. So that's another hot potato. Let's bring in PJ Crowley. From the US perspective, particularly when the United States says it's keen to be a part of the solution here, when you have perhaps a fundamental disregard from the Deputy Israeli Foreign Minister for the very basis of negotiations by saying there's no occupation, settlements are not illegal, how on earth is it possible to begin to get anywhere?
Well, and unfortunately, we have competing narratives, and all sides, and there's more than two, that have, if you will, cherry-pick some facts to present, their side of their version of events and why history supports whether should or should not be this step or this land or that land. But it is expressly these disputes that underscore why the only way to resolve this is through a peaceful negotiation. I give the Netanyahu government credit for finding a creative way to participate in debate. One of the challenges that we've had in the region in recent years for a variety of reasons, including the construction of the security fence, is there's just simply less interaction between Israelis and Palestinians to find common ground where there's an acknowledgement of these things we agree with, these things we disagree with, and what needs to be debated.
Does it not muddy the water when you have very pointed versions of history being put out onto the internet, endorsed by the state? Does it not make it a little bit more complex to reach a solution?
Well, this is a very complex situation to begin with, and the water has been muddied for quite some time. Certainly this is a reflection of the view of events as this present Israeli government sees it. Even the United States probably agrees with some aspects of this and disagrees with some of the presentation that is in this video.
Well, speaking of the United States, I have an interesting tweet here from We the People who says, in 1492, there was no country called Native America. Therefore, there were no Native Americans, ? Israel must be following our lead. And that kind of goes on the back of a tweet from Ibn Ezra who says, his name is Joseph Dana, has any Israeli government ever recognized the Palestinian people as a people with the land? And I guess I can open this up to anyone.
Yep, let's take that to Gil. Gil, don't you perhaps agree with Joseph Dana there that for there to be a beginning, a starting point, the Israelis have to recognize the Palestinians as a people, don't they?
I think that you're going to see an Israeli government that's taking steps not only to recognize the Palestinians as a people, but to create a second state. That's despite the fact that the Palestinians, they talk about two states. They don't talk about two states for two peoples. What the problem with that is they're interested in creating a Palestinian state alongside a democratic Israel that they hope will one day be an Arab state as well because of demographic and democratic changes. You're not recognizing the right for Israel to continue to exist as a Jewish state. That's an argument that Netanyahu has been making around the world. He says we recognized the Palestinian state back in 1947 and have been arguably over the last 20 years doing everything possible.
But he's also saying there's no occupation, and some of our viewers might be asking them, what are the Merkava tanks for, and the F-16s and the checkpoints and the wall in the West Bank? It seems borderline absurd that he can say this is not an occupation. Let's bring Hussein Ibish here, because I want to kick it on to the PA's.
I want
to ask you about the PA's unilateral declaration of statehood that is expected in September. tie that in with your response.
It's very complicated, but let me just say, everyone has a right to an opinion about whether something is occupied or not, but we have an adjudicating body in the world called the Security Council of the United Nations, and they have held that these territories are occupied, and Israel is the occupying power on dozens and dozens of occasions, unanimously, including the United States. So as a legal and political fact, Danny Ayalon is wrong. He has a right to his opinion that this isn't an occupation, but his opinion isn't worth anything because we have an adjudicator, and the adjudicator has spoken loudly and clearly. Now, as for the PLO, their plan to go to the UN in September and find some kind of recognition has gone through an evolutionary series of ideas. And right now, it looks like the idea is either one of three things: either to go to the Security Council and apply for membership and incur a U.S. veto, which I think could be very, very damaging for all parties, and probably not a wise thing from the Palestinian point of view, because it would be picking a losing fight with the United States over the issue of statehood in the Security Council, no less. The second idea is to get some kind of broader resolution in the General Assembly that would maybe upgrade the Palestinian.
But it would just be symbolic, wouldn't it? Because without the UN Security Council rubber stamp, this is purely symbolic.
There's the third option. Well, not really, because an upgrade in mission status would not necessarily be symbolic. It could have some real but limited benefits. There is a third option that people are talking about, which is to make Palestine, through the General Assembly, a non-member observer state. There have been 16 different non-member observer states in the past. All of them, if you include North and South Vietnam, that joined together and then became also a member state as Vietnam, ultimately became member states. And this might give them access to the International Criminal Court and other things. It is a potential way of bypassing the Security Council, but the diplomatic consequences might be very severe as well. So
I want to bring PJ Crowley in before we look at some tweets, and before I bring PJ in, let's remind you that Danny Ayalon almost came onto the program. He had agreed, but afterwards he pulled out, but had also agreed to perhaps join us next week. It would be interesting to hear his thoughts on this. PJ Crowley, all those options that Hussein Ibish had mentioned are no-go zones for the Obama administration.
Well,
from what we've heard from Hillary Clinton in the past.
Well, we don't know exactly what the Palestinians are going to put forward. They have talked about...
Why is there negativity towards a unilateral declaration of statehood?
Well, because ultimately, from the United States standpoint, the only way you get to a Palestinian state is through a negotiated settlement that deals with the very complicated but well-known issues from Jerusalem to borders to refugees to security. The United States' position has always been any unilateral action, and the U.S. believes that this would qualify as unilateral action, compromises and makes more difficult the path towards a negotiated settlement.
Let's talk hypotheticals. We have a tweet here from Sami Kishawi, who says, yes, the economic disparities alone between the Palestinian territories and Israel render the two-state solution inviable. What do you think of this?
Well, but the two-state solution is really the only way that you get what the Palestinians are seeking because ultimately, if they do go to the Security Council and ask to be seated as members, the United States and the Obama administration has indicated that it will veto, that request. That said, there are some things, as Hussein was talking about, that the Palestinians could get from this move, and that complicates issues for Israel, and that's why you've seen, perhaps in recent days, the government, at least in public, beginning to take a more nuanced posture in terms of its willingness to enter into negotiations sooner rather than later.
Gil Hoffman, are you afraid of a Palestinian declaration of statehood unilaterally?
Absolutely. No, absolutely not. September will have no impact. The General Assembly has no operative power. Only the Security Council has power. And Mahmoud Abbas is wasting time. Instead of coming to the negotiating table where you can get not only a state but peace, he's trying to embarrass Israel on the international front, which won't help his people at all. And that's what dictators do. His term ended in January 2009. He's not trying to help his own people. He's trying to stay in power. He's trying to improve his legacy.
You've called Mahmoud Abbas a dictator. I thought he was probably the most palatable leader from the Israeli point of view.
the Palestinians deserve to have an election. His term ended either in January 2009 or January 2010, depending on how you interpret Palestinian law. They're going to have an election eventually. Israel's taken a lot of steps to improve the Palestinians' economy, so they'll have an interest in choosing a leader that's willing to make the sacrifices necessary to help his own people that Abbas hasn't been willing to make.
Okay,
and that's what's unfortunate.
Okay, Hussein Ibish, I think a point where Gil Hoffman and perhaps Hamas unwittingly might agree upon is they both don't like Mahmoud Abbas and see him as quite dictatorial. So, I mean, it gives me an opportunity to bring up the internal Palestinian division. And surely you can't declare a Palestinian state while the Palestinians themselves are so terribly divided.
Well, I mean, it's a complicating factor, but I mean, I think one thing I would strongly agree with Gil on is that they do need to have an election. I think that's clear, and the main reason they haven't had one is the primary obstacle to an election has been Hamas, which is scared of the outcome in recent years. Although I think Fatah's enthusiasm for elections is also under some question. Now, the Palestinians are badly divided, but the authority of the PLO to negotiate on behalf of the Palestinians is unquestionable. There is no document, international, Arab, or Palestinian, that says anything other than that the PLO is the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinians. They are the diplomatic wing of the Palestinian people. So in terms of governance on the ground, there's a crisis of this split between Gaza and the West Bank, but at the diplomatic register, at the international register, and in terms of dealing and negotiating with Israel or anything that happens at the UN, there isn't any confusion because Hamas is not part of that at all. The PLO is.
Okay, let's bring in Malika.
That's on the Palestinian side. I have a tweet here from our digital producer, the one I'm filling in for you, PJ Crowley, who says, Ahmed says, in your opinion, is Israel, Netanyahu's government, leading Israel closer to peace and equality or war and injustice?
Well, the reality is, as I said earlier on, this is at its heart a political challenge. And there is absolutely, unfortunately, no rapport between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Abbas. And that makes it very difficult for each side to find a path into these negotiations. But I think there are there's posturing on both sides. What the United States has said to President Abbas and previously is Netanyahu standing here saying, "I'm ready for peace. I'm ready for negotiation to happen today." Test that proposition. You acquire more leverage inside the negotiation rather than setting preconditions before the negotiation takes place. Danny Ayalon in his video says that the 67 lines do not have legal standing. That said, they definitely have political standing because President Obama has said a negotiation has to start with the 67 lines recognizing changes that have occurred since then. So there's a lot of unfortunately posturing on both sides. Both have been at the cusp of beginning a negotiation, and tragically both have stepped back from that.
A declaration of statehood, though, is this going to end the injustice, the perceived injustice, perhaps, of the occupation?
I can't see it as a substitute for a negotiation. It can score some political points. It can actually probably add some leverage, but unfortunately, Gil is right that the Israeli reaction to a unilateral declaration will probably be set the process of negotiations back some months, if not years.
And as somebody outside of the system now, do you still believe, as you did when you were in the system, that the United States is an honest broker in this process, given the $3 billion of military aid, etc., to Israel every year?
Well, the United States is not the only player in this, certainly the quartet, and as we're seeing with Israeli and Palestinian leaders talking to European leaders this summer, they're going to have a role to play as we get to September. But the United States has a unique position. It's probably not as strong as it was in previous decades, but the United States remains the one player that can find a way to bring these parties together. Okay.
PJ Crowley, Gil Hoffman, and Hussein Ibish, stay where you are because we'll continue this in the post-show. Unfortunately, there's so much to say and so little time on the show itself that we're going to have to thank you for the moment, for an engaging discussion. And we've just kissed the surface of it. There's so much more to say. Thanks a lot for joining us. Do go ahead and have a look at Danny Ayalon's video on YouTube. It's sure to be divisive. Thanks for watching the stream. We'll see you tomorrow.